Hello everybody, this is Tyler. I'm gonna begin doing what I hope is a series of videos for a Python programming based project that is going to be recreating an existing tool that's written in Matlab. And I'll bring up the Matlab file exchange where it lives. It's pretty useful. Essentially what you do is, if you have some image that has some data on a set of axes and you want to digitize that, this lets you pick all these individual points and it will make the electronic data that you could put into a notepad file or Excel, I'm sure, or use it in MATLAB. It does that by you calibrate the axes here. So you click on the X min, the X max, the Y min, and the Y max. And then you can just grab whatever points you want. It gives you a little preview over here of what you're grabbing. And it has pretty good functionality. You can zoom, you can pan, and then when you're all done, you press enter and it saves your data. And now you have electronic data that you can put into Excel or MATLAB and do whatever you want with it. So it's a pretty useful tool, and it's pretty widely used. People are commenting in this year saying that it works well. The only thing is that I noticed it was last updated September of 2016, which is quite a while ago. And people have commented on some suggestions. I'll show this in a bit, but there are some warnings that pop up when you first start it. I don't think it's getting updated like it should, but people love this. And I think this is what I'm going to try to do using Python, because I think of all the programming languages, I'm probably strongest in Python. And I think it would probably be the easiest to do in Python. Python has a lot of libraries that can help you do things like this. It'll be a GUI, so I'll be using Tkinter and possibly Matplotlib, maybe some other ones. I'm not really sure. So I will open it up, and what you do is grab it, and if you open it up in this sample, you can see right off the bat it throws some warnings for, it looks like raw mode property, erase mode property. Maybe those are some type of class properties, I'm not sure. But they're going to be no longer supported in future releases, so it's possible that this will break in the future. I haven't noticed any bugs yet. It still works fine and does what I want it to do. And so I open this in sample mode so it's already grabbing this image. And what I do is I hit calibrate. It gives you these tooltips, which is really convenient and nice. Click on the origin of the x-axis. And since it's a 0, I'm going to make that a 0. This is 20. This is negative 1.5. And 2. And once you're done with that, the next thing to do is you click this button here, grab points, and then you're ready to go. So I'll do the blue one just to show you. And you just click and click and click. It's probably can't see it, but well, you can see this here up in the upper right corner. It gives you this preview of what the data, what data you've already selected. But you can zoom by clicking the right mouse button and dragging, and you can pan by grabbing the left mouse button, and you might be able to see it. There are these little red dots. That's the data that is being selected, so you just come through here, grab all the points you want to. Of course, you're not limited to just, these points. You could do, if you need more precision, you could just grab all of these, and so it's pretty useful. I'm not going to do all of them because I'm just demonstrating. And when you're done, you hit enter, and that gets saved. And if I come back to Matlab here and I say data, and there's my data. Super easy, super convenient. I think it will be fun to try to recreate this. And I haven't really, I know a general sense of what I need to be doing. I've done a couple projects using Python Tkinter library, so like setting up all these GUI elements, these widgets with buttons, and this is a set of axes, so that's probably going to be the matplotlib library. In terms of loading in an image and clicking on some pixel in the image, I don't know how that is going to happen. We shall see. So I'm doing this live. I'll probably be doing lots of research as I do this, and I won't show most of that, but yeah, so I'm going to open up Visual Studio, and then we will get going. All right, so I've got VS Code open. How I'm actually going to do this is use VirtualBox to set up a virtual machine. It's Ubuntu 20.04, and I'm SSH'd into that machine, and I'm using VS Code as a remote, not sure what you call it, as a, remotely. So I have this integrated terminal here, and I've already kind of decided, I think what I'm going to call this is Lightbox. And I got that idea because at work, I was once told that, prior to having tools like this available to you, what they used to do is they would use a lightbox where you would trace something, and that's how they would make copies of, drawings or plotted data. And so I'm going to call this Lightbox because that's kind of what it does. It's just a silly name. So yeah, I made this document called requirements, and yeah, there's nothing in it. And I figure the first thing to do is probably, I want to write down a very specific set of requirements for this app, because I want to have a good idea of where I'm heading, and like eventually what I want to do is, release this on GitHub, obviously, but I want to have an initial release and then updates after that. Because if I don't set myself some type of goal, it'll just be polishing the cannonball, and it'll never get to the point where I'm happy with it. So I want to set something very concrete of what I'm looking for to publish. And so give me a second. I want to think about that, and I'll be back. So I gave it some thought, and you don't need that. I guess what I'm just calling version 1.0.0 as I see it, the app has four main functions. You load an image, you calibrate, you grab points, and then you write the data. So these will probably change as I get going, but I wanted to rough something out. At first, in terms of what type of image that you're loading, I don't know if that's going to matter. I don't know if it'll be hard one way or the other. I'm not really going to worry about it right now. Some type of image, maybe like a bitmap or a PNG, not really sure. In terms of calibrating the axes, one thing I know I want to do immediately, and this is something that I had thought about putting in like a future patch or update or something like that. But this annoys the heck out of me. And what it is when you go into calibrate mode here, and if you click on 0, and then you type, nothing happens because this doesn't open in cursor mode. You have to click into this and then type it. I want it to, as soon as you click, you can start typing. I've used this a bit, and that's probably my number one gripe with it. It's pretty good app, but the fact that you have to click into it, that is kind of annoying. Now I'm saying that, but oops, negative 1.5. I'm saying that, but I don't know how tough that'll be. So we'll see, but that is going to be a main focus point. Handle askew axes. I've seen similar tools to this, where rather than clicking 4 times to give you kind of whatever shape you have, you click and drag across the screen, so it automatically gives you a rectangle that's parallel to the bottom of your screen. Now, for probably 95% of cases, that's probably okay. But in the off chance that you get something like this, where maybe you're skewed a little bit or it's sideways, it makes it tough at that point because you kind of need to have your points diagonal. So that is something I want to do. I love the pan and zoom control. I really want to keep that. I don't think that will be that hard to do. I have looked at a little bit of the GRABIT Matlab source code, and I know there are going to have to be some button delays on here, and I'm not sure if that's going to get complicated or not, but we'll see. In terms of grabbing points, same thing, pan and zoom control. These are all just maintaining the same features. Undo button, I don't think that'll be tough to do. The preview axes, also don't think will be that difficult. Right now, I just want to write to just a file, just a text file. And in the future, I think it might be useful to write directly to probably a Microsoft Excel spreadsheet. There's probably a very specific API on how to do that, but I don't really want to get distracted by that now. And so in terms of future updates, and again, I'm not sure if these might just make it into the initial release, I don't know, but these are just kind of things that I would consider to be features maybe, or upgrades. People have called for having this software have log scale on the X and Y. And so I want to try to do that. I don't think it'll be too hard. And then when you're point grabbing, it can be a little hard to see where the cursor is at. And it's even more hard to see what points you've already picked. So I think some basic options to change what's the size of the dot that it makes, what's the color. And I wrote crosshairs here. And let me see. I have to grab one. Oops, that's okay. I'm just grab points. And so you can see the cursor is just this little cross. And it's not hard to see now, but sometimes if you get like a busy set of axes that has, really thick grid lines in the background, you can kind of get lost. And so what I thought would be cool is have some type of crosshair that extends the entire height and width of the screen. Like I know AutoCAD, I think it's been a while since I've used AutoCAD, but I think AutoCAD, the main UI is like a crosshair, but it extends the entire height and width of the screen, and it's really easy to keep track of. So I think that would be cool. I don't know if that will be hard to do or not, because most of these features that I'm talking about, Tkinter is a pretty rich library, and Python is, there's a library for almost anything. So I don't know if these things I'm going to have to be making from scratch, so to speak, or if that will just be an option within Tkinter or something like that. So I'm not sure if, how hard these individual things. I don't suspect they'll be overly difficult, but like this thing with the crosshairs, I've never explored that. I don't know if that's going to be hard or not. Setting up a log on your X and Y is pretty easy. So we're going to find out. I mentioned earlier that I don't have a big plan. I'm going to be doing this all kind of live for you guys. I'll probably be referring to some of my old code where I did write a Tkinter app, just to remember some of the function signatures and some of the geometry manager things. But I'm gonna my plan is to not skip over anything. If I do skip something, I will come back and explain what I did, but I want to do it all live. I'm not sure how many videos it's going to end up being. I hope it doesn't get too boring. That is something I am thinking about, but I think seeing the individual steps of how something like this is made is kind of cool. And it can kind of illustrate, the actual process of developing something, because it can be quite slow. And so I guess without further ado, we are going to get started. Oh, and something I forgot to mention is I will be using Git throughout this. I use Git a lot just for my own projects. I've never used Git where I'm actually collaborating with other people. And so sometimes I think using Git just by yourself is a little silly, because you can effectively get to the same thing just by saving your code remotely. But I will be using it. I stole a section of code for my bash RC that displays the current Git branch on your Linux bash prompt here. So it can display what branch you're on. I do find Git useful for branching. I use it to branch a lot. Like if you're gonna try something out and you're not sure if it's gonna pan out for you, do it on a branch and then pull the branch into master. I'm not going to be pushing this to, Actually, scratch that. I will be pushing this to a GitHub repo, but only for to save it. Like, in case my computer dies, I don't want to lose all my work, but I probably won't. I probably will be a private repo because I don't want to release it to the public until it's finished. So yeah. By the way, I have fixed my typos that I made. I would get used to that. I'm probably going to be making a lot of typos. I'm not the best typist. But I was thinking, I was doing some work off camera, and it might be better to go through just a little bit of how TK and Tkinter works. I'm going to assume that people watching this video know Python at least a little bit, but maybe are unfamiliar with TK. So I think I'm going to do that before we go to any coding. This is some info that I just grabbed straight from Wikipedia. And it says, TK is a free and open source cross-platform widget toolkit that provides a library of basic elements of GUI widgets for building a graphical user interface. And this is the demo that is included in Wikipedia. And some of the basic widgets are things like buttons, skip canvas for now, checkbox, combo box. So like, this is a button. It's just a button that you'd click. A check button is just check. Radio buttons. These things are called combo boxes. That's you click it and it's like a drop-down menu that you can select from. I believe this is called a list box. Yeah, list box. Menu are kind of like, file menu, edit, view, options, help. This is referred to as, I don't actually know what this is, but it looks like you can have these sort of expand and collapse kind of sub-menus. And Canvas, I haven't done a lot with Canvas. I think it's kind of like a blank slate to import other types of GUI elements, like you would put a matplotlib set of axes inside of a canvas. And then, of course, like an edit field where you just, you can type whatever you want. So it has a lot of different elements that you all kind of arrange together. And what you do is, take this push button just for example. You would have this button and you'd have to have some code that would arrange it. Where do you want this button to be physically located? That's done with what's called the geometry manager. Then you give the button a name, and then, where'd my mouse go? There it is. You give the button a name, and then you program what are called callback functions. So unlike a procedural script, a GUI is kind of just in this continuous loop, constantly waiting for some type of user input. And so what you do is I keep losing my mouse. You click this button and that would trigger some type of a callback function, and the callback function would do something. And so it's basically just this arrangement of widgets. They're called widgets in TK. This arrangement of widgets, you bind those to different callback functions that perform all the tasks that you want to, and that's the main architecture of a TK app, any GUI app for that matter. Now, so this is just a screenshot of GRABIT that I took, and from the previous slide, we can see that you've got some buttons here. This is probably some sort of edit field. These are also edit fields. Edit fields can be changed so they appear as though you can type in them, like in here, or they can be read-only. So these are probably edit fields. This is probably another type of, maybe this is like a push button or an edit field, but you've got axes here. This is a list box. And then this is probably a canvas that hosts some image. And like I've been saying, some ability to click on these points. Now, I know enough about doing this type of thing, GUI programming, that it can be beneficial to at least have an idea of what you want your GUI to look like. And this is what I've set up. It's very similar to what GRABIT looks like right now. I'll have some type of file menu up here, a browse button with the file path, a calibrate button with xmin, xmax, ymin, ymax, xscale, and yscale. I'm thinking that's where I'll have a drop-down menu. I think TK calls it a combo box. That'll be the ability to have either a linear or a logarithmic scale, because that is one feature that several commenters were asking for on the Matlab file exchange. And then same thing, grab points. This is where I mentioned, crosshairs spelled correctly, this is where I mentioned it might be nice to have the ability to have different pointers, like the AutoCAD style, full vertical, full horizontal crosshairs. And then marker type, size, color. If you want squares or circles, or what size you want and what color. Some type of global, I just call it tooltips. Very similar to what is in GRABIT right now, where it gives you this type of information. I like that, so I want to keep that. Preview, exact same. The image, exact same. I decided to split this up because right now, GRABIT lets you, you could probably fit maybe 20 or 25 entries in here, and I don't think you'd really ever get to that many. And so I decided to break it up, and I'm going to have just a small list box here that maybe you could preview 5 or 6, and then a scroll bar. And I thought it might be cool to be able to, when you click on a data set like data 002 or something like that, that it would actually display the tabulated data here, and it would update the preview. That would be cool. Also, what I had just thought about is it might also be cool to actually see what you've plotted on the image. That might be useful. Because the preview gives you a preview, but it doesn't tell you anything about how accurate your point picking was, so it might be cool to be able to check that you did in fact pick the correct points, and maybe like click and drag a point to a different spot. And the next slide, I've already done another project in using Tkinter, and what I've learned is that it definitely is beneficial at the beginning to at least have an idea of how all of your different classes are going to talk to each other. Generally speaking, the research I've done shows that the best way to organize this type of GUI, or any type of GUI, I guess I should say, is that each one of these little boxes, like this browse box, calibrate, grab points, tooltips, preview, each of those is its own class within a parent class being the entire app. And so I gave some thought to how I'm going to organize all of my classes. So I'll basically just have main.py, and these correspond to the major fields that I had on the previous slide. So browsing to select your image, calibrating the axes, actually grabbing the points, the tooltips, preview, memory, the tabular data, and then the image itself. And so these are all going to be objects that exist within this main.py, with each object being an instance of this class. So I'll have a browse object that is an instantiation of the browse class, same with calibrate class. And then I will design all of my widgets within each class. So we'll look at the calibrate one just because that's got a lot going on. So I'm going to have some type of push button. I just came up with these names just now. So some type of push button, a handful of entry fields that will be populated based on when you actually select the points from the image. And then a couple of combo boxes for selecting either a linear scale or a log scale. And that's going to be one class. And what's not shown on here is actually how these classes talk to each other. Like, for example, I know that when I'm calibrating, I would like to have some tooltips displayed. And so when I create the instance of this calibrate class, I'm going to have to, I think, pass in the tips object into this calibrate object, because I want this calibrate class to have access to these attributes and methods. So that's something I haven't, that isn't shown right now. I maybe will make some other type of, what's the word? I've seen them before. An inheritance plot where you kind of show lines of how all the different, who the classes inherit from and which classes appear as arguments of other classes. So I may do something like that. And then all my widgets are going to be housed inside of this widgets.py module, each one of these being its own class. So I'll have a button class that'll probably just inherit from the TK button class, same with entry, same with combo backs and label. I'll probably have the axes within their own class because that's where I'll be playing with matplotlib, and that has a fair amount of settings, so I kind of want that in its own class. But this is a basic outline, not meant to show everything, but just to give you kind of an idea of how I'm approaching this. I think, from what I found, this is, I think, the recommended way of how to approach a GUI. And so now I think it's finally time to get into some actual coding. All right. So I need to touch main.py. So the first thing to do is import Tkinter as TK. Oops. Don't do that. So Tkinter is part of the Python standard library. I'm pretty sure, at least. Oh, maybe not. Give me a sec. All right, I figured it out, and turns out on Windows installations of Python, Tkinter is part of the standard library, but on Linux-based systems, it is not. And since this is, I'm SSH to my Ubuntu machine, I ran Python 3, I tried to import Tkinter, but it failed, saying it couldn't find it. So I had to install Python 3 Tkinter, it did its thing, and then I run Python, import Tkinter, and it works. So that works nicely. And so the first thing I'm going to do is do the old if name equals main. I'm going to define main. Now the first thing to do, I'm cheating a little bit because on my other screen here I have some sample code from what I've written before using TK. And the first thing to do is root equals tk dot tk. That initializes a tk root object, and I'm gonna skip import doing all my classes for just right now, because I think if I do root.tk.main loop, that should be enough to at least bring up just a window, a blank TK window. But the thing is because I'm SSH'd to a virtual machine, I need to do something where is it? Yeah, I need to do something called X11 forwarding, which basically lets you display graphics when you're SSH to a virtual machine. I'll be honest, I don't know a tremendous amount about it. It appears that there are some security warnings because I think you bypass some of the standard encryption that is happening when you are SSH'd. But I'm not really worried about that because I'm within my home network. So I need to get that set up. Else nothing will happen. As a matter of fact, let's just try it and see what happens. Nice. Let's see. Yeah. So it's yelling at me because it doesn't know where to display its graphics. So let's do that real quick. Okay, so that took a little longer than expected. I did some research about this, and as it turns out, there were a couple of things working against me. The first one is when you're using X11 forwarding, setting up these environmental display variables is important. You have to set up the correct variable on both your remote server and your local machine. And you need to have some type of X server application running. So I use this. I just stumbled upon when I was reading some Stack Overflow posts. I use this software, VCX server. I think you could also use something like CGWin or something like that, but this is what I settled on. And so that's thing number one, is making sure that your display variables are set up. But if I try to run this, it's still going to yell at me. And the reason is, I did some more reading, and the integrated terminal, which I'm using in VS Code, has some nuances to it, in that it doesn't source information from your bash profile, I believe. And so when it's trying to read your display variables, it's not actually doing it correctly. But a workaround is, I'm gonna go off screen here for a sec, and if I SSH to my remote server with X11 forwarding on, I put in my password. Okay, so now I have a separate SSH instance session running, and I come back here and I try it. Ta-da! It works. Probably could do some more reading on what exactly is happening, but I don't want to get distracted by that. And so this is what happens when you run root.tk.main loop. It comes up with this window here, and this is where all of your widgets and everything are going to live. So that is basically, we are started. And I think I'm going to end the first episode there. There was some background information at the beginning, talked a little bit about TK and Tkinter and my general approach. And I think following this will be a lot more coding than was done. So thank you guys for tuning in, and I'm excited to finish this. I think it's going to be cool. I'm not really sure how many episodes this is going to take, but I'm excited. So take care, guys, and we'll talk to you next time. Thanks.